I have to share with you, you probably couldn't see this, but when Ruth bent over and opened this door down here, I expected Penny to suddenly appear. But she must still be sleeping, so I guess we'll move on without her. The thought occurred to me this morning, as Diana and I were walking on the beach with the dog in the fog, I almost lost her, that I probably should have titled this Miracles and Angels Are for Real, because there are so many people who appear in this story that I'm about to share with you. For as long as I can remember, I've been a believer of miracles. There are simply things in life that science couldn't explain for me. I guess when I was quite young, my parents and my church did a good job. This past December, a critical event caused me to re-examine my beliefs in a way I never could have imagined. At the time, I believed I was in perfect health. My annual physical showed great numbers and results. There were no indications of any problems lurking in my body. However, let me share with you what happened that December that got my attention because I was wrong. For the past several years, my wife Diane and I've spent a number of months in Naples, Florida. On December 17th this past year, we had signed up for a dinner cruise that was to leave from the dock in Fort Myers, Florida. The event that drew us was a school Christmas party offered for the staff and administration of the school where Diane teaches. Shortly before leaving for the 40-minute drive north of Fort Myers, I began having second thoughts about going. The price was right, but the cruise was aboard a gambling boat, and gambling simply doesn't interest me. I don't have enough money. Still, I was drawn to the live entertainment and particularly a very nice buffet dinner. I really like buffets. Away from the dock at 5:45, we were underway to open waters in the Gulf of Mexico, and the boat was not scheduled to return to the dock until approximately midnight. After 20 to 30 minutes into the cruise, I began feeling a bit strange. I knew I wasn't seasick. It was more of a sharp pain in my abdomen rather than nausea. At first, I tried to ignore it and decided to just go with the flow, thinking maybe it'll get better in time. But it didn't. I hadn't eaten much for lunch because I was preparing myself for the huge buffet. Have I said I love buffets? But now the thought of food, any food, didn't interest me at all. As I watched the chef carve steamship round of beef, I remember feeling almost repulsed at the sight of it. I settled for a scoop of pasta and a small salad. 2 bites were more than enough, and I knew something wasn't right. I excused myself to the men's room. When I returned to the table, half listening to the conversation, Diane looked at me and asked me if I felt okay. No, I don't. But I don't know what it is. I can't put my finger on it. A few minutes later, it was back to the men's room where I spent nearly 30 minutes getting sick. I'll spare you the ugly details. This was very unlike me. Diane and others told me when I emerged from the men's room, this time I was as white as a ghost, and rather out of it. The pain in my abdomen had increased dramatically, and I could not imagine just sitting on board this boat for 5 more hours while this kept getting worse. On a scale of 1 to 10, the pain was off the chart. I knew I had to lie down flat, and I knew intuitively I was in big trouble. By now, we had moved nearly 2 hours away from land, cruising to a destination in international waters where the doors to the casino could be legally open to all passengers. Diane went to one of the crew and asked for an EMT. We learned there was none. No infirmary, no lounge, nowhere to lie down except on the floor. At that point, a woman staff person came to our aid. With the help of another staff person, she improvised a makeshift bed on the floor in the corridor outside the door leading to the casino. Interesting picture, isn't it? So there I was at the threshold just outside a door with a small window in it, on the floor, curled in a fetal position, writhing in horrendous pain and vomiting into paper bags. The two staff were trying their best to comfort me with ice bags and neck rubs, but nothing helped. Now begin the unexplainable series of events that follow. For my own comfort, I attached numbers to these just so I could keep track of them. Number one, the woman staff person by the name of Stephanie is not a full-time employee of the cruise line, but sometimes came along on the cruise for the fun of it just to help out the crew on her day off from her day job. This was her day off. 2, she also just happened to be the head emergency room nurse in her real life at a nearby hospital where I would be taken later. 3, Stephanie also just happened to be the wife of the captain of the ship. As I said, unexplainable events. It was she who realized I was experiencing a medical emergency and made it clear to the captain, her husband, turn this ship around and get to shore as fast as possible. The ship turned around, a lot of disappointed gamblers on board, headed to shore as fast as the captain could push the engines. I was in such pain that I wasn't sure I could endure a 3-hour return trip, and prayed for some kind of relief, even if it meant being thrown overboard. All the way back, I remember feeling the vibration of the engines, and I could hear the whine of the motors, indicating to me the captain was pushing that ship as hard as he dared. 4, we were 3+ hours out to sea, and it would presumably take 3 hours getting back. The captain had radioed ahead to have an ambulance waiting at the dock, and they were to take me to the emergency room where Stephanie works. When we finally docked at 11 p.m., a return trip of nearly 1 hour faster, I was loaded into an emergency vehicle, a first experience for me, by the way, and we were at the emergency entrance in minutes. I think God made it clear that was where he wanted me to go, so the rest of his miracles could be played out. One of my wife's colleagues accompanied her to the hospital and stayed with her through the night, sensing this was serious, and Diane should not be left alone. Diane quickly used her cell phone to call our niece and her husband in Columbus, Ohio, who are both physicians, and they both listened in on the diagnosis and the prognosis, surgery. That was reassuring. The following morning, Diane's brother and his wife joined her for support while I was undergoing a series of surgeries. The day after that, December 19th, our son Ryan and his wife, Rachel, flew in from St. Paul, Minnesota on the first flight available to them to be with her and me and join the anxious group. During this whole time, there's no question that Diane was the glue that kept this whole group together and kept me going. At the hospital, Dr. Leah Blackwell, a young emergency room surgeon, known as highly competent and a spitfire of a doctor, rapidly administered a series of lab tests, eliminating a number of possibilities. My blood pressure and pulse were rising at a dangerous rate, and my white blood count was alarmingly high and rising. Eventually, Dr. Blackwell's diagnosis was acute mesenteric ischemia, a blocked blood supply to my small intestine. More tests revealed a blood clot had formed at the site of a small aneurysm that had apparently developed a tear. 5. At 3 a.m., an ultrasound finds the tear in the mesenteric artery, which is very hard to find, as I understand, under the best of conditions. This artery lies below the stomach and is tucked in behind other organs. You all have one too. She's going to need assistance and would like 2 of her partners in the practice to come in immediately to do surgery. She shares with Diane and me, though I don't recall any of this, that this is very serious and that Diane should call our family. Quote, Diane, call your family. That doesn't sound good. My chances of surviving this procedure at that time were very slim. 1% to 2%, we're told. Most people don't make it out of surgery, if in fact they're fortunate enough to get to a hospital. 6, Dr. Thomas Kowalski is called out of bed to be the lead surgeon. He had been in Texas all week, had just arrived back that night after spending several days attending a cardiology conference, and by his own account was very tired and, fortunately, in his own words, not too hungover. Later we learned from hospital staff, if you have to have serious surgery at that hospital or in that area, Dr. Kowalski's the person to do it. At 4 a.m., surgery begins and lasted 4.5 hours. Dr. Kowalski somehow goes directly to and finds the mesenteric artery. Quickly finds the tear that needs to be repaired. And the tear had caused a clot that had lodged in the artery, and it appeared that the intestine was dying. Prognosis didn't look good at that point. When the small intestine dies, the patient dies. Dr. Kowalski had only seen 1 or 2 such cases in his distinguished career, and neither of those souls survived. Dr. Blackwell comes out of surgery to tell Diane that the repair had been accomplished, but my chances were still not good because my intestine had not regained blood flow. Diane says she began planning ways to tell our family and friends that I didn't make it, and began mentally planning funeral arrangements. 7, Dr. Blackwell returned 2 hours later to tell Diane, with what she says was a rather euphoric and somewhat puzzled look on her face, my intestine seemed to suddenly be regaining its color, and blood flow appeared to be restored. Now it's just wait and see. I was then moved to recovery and ICU, where blood transfusions were started. I'd lost an enormous amount of blood. It's now December 18th, 6 p.m., 24 hours after this all began. And it's determined that I must go back to surgery because I'm hemorrhaging. My blood's not clotting, which I guess is common in such serious surgery. 4 hours later, the bleeding continues and more surgery is necessary. I lost count of how many times they cut me open. More waiting to see if I can rebound from this latest assault. This time after surgery, a temporary covering is placed over the incision without closing it, which extends from just below my sternum to about 3 inches below my navel. I don't want to show it to you, but the trauma that lessened the trauma of closing and opening the area. Talk about letting it all hang out. Transfusion continued all through the night. By December 19th, 6 a.m., my temperature had risen to 102. 2 more surgeries have to be done to control the internal bleeding. At 8:30 a.m., my heart, liver, and kidney functions are all strong, and I seem to be stabilizing. They now feel they can finally close the incision, but continue to monitor everything very closely. As I awoke 4 days later and became more aware of my surroundings, as well as the people in the room, I sensed Diane's presence, and my son Ryan and his wife Rachel in the room beside my bed, and I can't describe well enough the strong sense of calm and like everything's going to be okay. Now it must be my job to get well. 8, due to the grace of God, in my opinion, there was no bypass of the intestine necessary. None of my intestine had to be removed. The first surgery that Dr. Kowalski was indeed a miracle. And I choose to believe that at that point the Holy Spirit entered Dr. Kowalski and took over. I don't in any way mean to diminish the skills and the efforts of all 3 surgeons who were in the OR, but even he was surprised at what he had just done and witnessed. The medical staff in the ICU awarded me, remember this is December 17th, 18th, 19th. ICU staff awarded me the official title of Miracle Man of 2011. Dr. Kowalski told me, had you not been in good health before this, you would not have survived. But I, on the other hand, choose to believe that it was the Holy Spirit that placed Dr. Kowalski in the OR. Entered his mind, entered his eyes, hands, and heart to repair the damage and save my life. Every physician I've come in contact with since has said, you really are a miracle man. At this point in time, I'm blessed to say that I'm 100% back to my health, as far as I know. I was wrong before. However, I still have a very difficult time wrapping my brain and my heart around actually coming that close to leaving this life. Dr. Kowalski now calls me, with a big hug and a smile on my head, at follow-up visits, his poster patient. Number 9, upon my admission to the hospital, Diane got on the computer and sent out a message to our entire email address book, enlisting prayers for my survival and then recovery. Therefore, in addition to this church, Pastor Ruth, Earl, and many of you, our bank was asked for prayers. Our credit card was asked for prayers. Our car loan company was asked for restaurants, our veterinarian, the dog's daycare facility, everyone in that address book was asked for prayers. I'm quite sure some were thinking, who is this guy? Well, it worked. Friends we hadn't seen in years responded. Whole churches put us on their prayer list. Cards poured in. Letters arrived. Gifts came. Friends cooked meals, delivered them. People came just to chat and visit. It's pretty humbling to know and realize that you're being prayed for by so many people. Some you don't even know and may never meet. Of all faiths, all persuasions. Pastor Ruth asked me some questions that I thought were just amazing. She helped me focus on some things. I just want to share them with you real quickly because the answers are brief. Did you think this is it? Is it over? Quite honestly, at first, I was in such pain I didn't really care. However, I also know I was not fully aware of the seriousness of it all. I just wanted the pain to stop. My family had to bear that possibility. Another question was, what were your thoughts? At approximately 7-8 days, I believe it was, in the ICU, it hit me as to how close I came to actually dying. I hit a psychological wall. In the dark of the night, I awoke in a cold sweat, filled with fear, panic, tears in my eyes, and gratitude. Dr. Kowalski warned me I would most likely experience such panic attacks periodically, and he was right. Did you experience anything like a life review, my life flashing before my eyes, or the white tunnel, a bright light? A longtime friend and colleague from the college where we taught for over 35 years called and asked, "Did you see the white light?" He had nearly died from a heart attack years earlier. I asked, "Henry, you were there a few years ago. Did you see it?" He said, "No." I responded, "Neither did I. Maybe we were not allowed to go further down the tunnel." Last question. What were your prayers like? Did you feel forsaken by God, or did you feel that you were continually in His care? I love this question because it helps me focus and understand where I was and just what happened to me and my family. I never, ever questioned God. Not why me. I've always believed He does not do bad things to us. Rather, He's there when the chips are down and shows us the way out. His plan is infallible. I trusted in Him all the way. Others have asked me, "Do you have a fear of getting on boats?" David and Judy asked me a few weeks ago, "Do you have a fear of getting on this boat?" My response, absolutely not. After all, He put me on that boat so that I would survive. He knew this was coming, and He put me where I needed to be. I suppose a natural reaction is to wonder often, why was I spared? Why me? What is it that I'm supposed to do or accomplish in the rest of my life to be more deeply appreciative of the gift I've been given? How will I know when it appears? Will I recognize it when it comes? Faith is so demanding at times, and it can be so frightening all at once. A close friend of ours said recently with a very straight face, "Well, God didn't want you." And the devil didn't know what to do with you. So I guess we're stuck with you. Diane tells me with a smile, "My purpose in life now is," quote, "you're supposed to be nice to your wifey." Somehow I think there's more to it than that. That comes easily and naturally. Amen. Thank you for listening.